The Halloween Twilight Guides. Chapter 2, The Lonely Spirit. Tendrils of mist curled around Lilith's ankles as she twirled, her laughter a bell-like chime in the perpetual twilight of polar night town. The air was cold and crisp, carrying a faint scent of pine and winter spices. The mist brought a dampness that tickled the nose and left a chilly tingle in the air. Snowflakes danced on her outstretched palms, each one a tiny, frozen star.
Lilu, look! Isn't it magical?
Lilith's eyes sparkled with childlike wonder. Lilu sighed, her gaze fixed on the ethereal wisps floating between the crooked houses.
We have work to do, Lilith. The spirits won't guide themselves.
Lilith's smile dimmed slightly, but she nodded, falling into step beside her sister. As they walked, the cobblestones whispered secrets beneath their feet, and carved pumpkins winked from frost-rimmed windowsills.
I know.
Lilith sang softly.
But can't we enjoy the beauty for just a moment?
Lilu's lips tightened.
Our duty is to the spirits, not to admire the scenery.
A flicker of movement caught Lilith's eye. Between the shadows of two gnarled pine trees, a translucent figure shimmered, barely visible in the gloom.
Oh.
Lilith breathed, her heart aching at the sadness emanating from the spirit.
Lilu, look. That poor soul seems so alone.
Lilu straightened. All business.
Then let's guide it quickly and move on. We have many more to attend to before the night is through.
Lilith hesitated, torn between her sister's urgency and the pull of empathy tugging at her heart.
Maybe we could spend a little more time with this one? They seem to need extra care.
Lilu's eyes narrowed.
Lilith, our job is to guide, not to coddle. We lead them to the other side, nothing more.
Lilith glanced back at the lonely spirit, her resolve wavering. She wanted to help, to ease that palpable loneliness, but Lilu's words echoed in her mind. With a small sigh, she nodded.
You're right, let's do what we must.
As they approached the spirit, Lilith's thoughts swirled like the mist around them, her heart heavy with the desire to truly connect, but the weight of their responsibilities pressed down. The spirit turned toward them, hope flickering in its translucent eyes. Lilith felt her heart twist.
Hello.
She said softly, her voice warm despite the cold.
We're here to help you find your way.
Lilu stepped forward, her tone crisp and efficient.
It's time for you to move on. We'll guide you to the other side.
Lilith watched as the spirit wavered, caught between Lilu's firm directive and her own gentle welcome. She longed to understand this lost soul's story, but they couldn't linger. As they began guiding the spirit, Lilith's thoughts drifted to the countless other lonely souls waiting in the shadows of polar night town. How many more would they encounter, each one yearning for a connection they couldn't fully offer? The night stretched endlessly before them, a twilight tapestry woven with whispers. Lilith felt a familiar tug of melancholy. She glanced at Lilu, who remained steadfast and focused, and wondered if her sister ever felt the same ache of unfulfilled empathy. With a small shake of her head, Lilith refocused on the task at hand. There would be time for reflection later. For now, they had a duty to fulfill, lonely spirits to guide, and a long night ahead in the perpetual twilight of polar night town. As the spirit began to fade, Lilith's brow furrowed. Something about this soul's lingering sorrow tugged at her heart. She turned to Lilu, her voice soft but urgent.
Wait, I think there's more here.
The spirit's form was hazy and translucent, like a shimmering mirage against the dark horizon. Shadows clung to her like a cloak of melancholy. Lilu noticed the spirit's absent-minded demeanor, as though she wasn't interested in being helped. She sighed, her dark eyes reflecting the flickering street lamps.
Lilith, we can't dawdle. There are others.
I know, but...
Lilith trailed off, her gaze drawn back to the shimmering figure before them. The air around the spirit carried the scent of pure loneliness, the kind that lingers in empty rooms and forgotten places.
What's your name?
Lilith asked gently. The spirit did not respond, as though she didn't understand. Lilu observed the forlorn figure and sensed the deep isolation she must have felt, not just in death, but in life.
It seems like she doesn't understand what you're saying.
How can we help her if she doesn't understand us?
Lilith asked, sensing the barrier between them. Lilu glanced at her sister, her voice steady but firm.
Lilith, we have other spirits waiting. It's our duty to help them all before the night is over.
As Lilu spoke, her body tensed slightly, a subtle impatience in her movements, like someone keenly aware of time slipping away.
I know, but she seems so pitifully alone.
Lilith replied, resisting her sister's pragmatism. Lilu sighed helplessly, wondering who gave her sister such a soft-hearted nature. She then refocused on the young woman's spirit. Lilu's eyes narrowed as she studied Yao's ethereal form. Her fingers moved gracefully through the air, tracing symbols that glowed faintly against the cold night.
It's not about language.
She murmured, as if speaking to the mist itself.
This spirit has lost the consciousness that ties her to the living world. I'll tap into the threads of her soul, find where they lead.
Lilu's hands began to glow with a pale, ethereal light as she drew intricate symbols in the air, each one pulsing with faint energy, like ripples on water. The air shimmered, and for a moment, the veil between worlds seemed to thin. A soft wind stirred the snow beneath their feet, and from the misty void, faint symbols appeared, ancient Chinese characters taking form.
She came from China, but her life ended here.
Lilu said softly, her voice filled with solemnity.
She's from China.
Lilith echoed, her eyes tracing the faint characters in the air.
She came so far.
Lilith's expression brightened as hope stirred.
We can use the language of her homeland to draw her consciousness back. Once it's restored, we can guide her.
Lilu nodded, her tone measured.
When her consciousness returns, we'll be able to communicate with her fully, in the universal language of the spirit world.
The twins exchanged a glance, and Lilith nodded in agreement. Moving closer to Yao, they decided to communicate through action rather than words. Lilith pulled a small lantern from her pocket, a remnant of past Halloween nights, and Lilu lit it softly. They placed the lantern in front of the young woman's spirit and began drawing symbols in the snow, symbols of home and comfort. Lilith traced a Chinese character in the snow, one symbolizing peace. Slowly, Yao's eyes widened in recognition. Though they couldn't share words, Yao could feel the sincerity in their actions. It was a reminder of home, of the life she had left behind. Something deep within her stirred, something she thought had been lost forever. The language of empathy, expressed through small but meaningful gestures, began to bridge the gap words couldn't cross. Yao's expression softened as she knelt beside the lantern, her fingers gently tracing the symbols. The connection wasn't forged through words, but through a shared sense of memory and belonging. After a while, Yao's consciousness returned. Slowly, she opened her mouth, her voice barely a whisper carried on the wind like a mournful song. The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of her loneliness.
Yao.
She did not fully understand what Lilith had said earlier, but she wanted to introduce herself. Lilith smiled encouragingly.
Yao Ling, that must be your name. Why are you still here? What's holding you back?
Yao's form trembled, wisps of ethereal mist curling around her feet.
You understand what I'm saying?
She looked incredulous. Lilu stepped forward.
We are Twilight guides. We understand all the languages of the spirit world.
Is that so?
Yao nodded slowly.
Twilight guides, I feel forgotten, invisible. Even in death, no one sees me.
As Yao spoke, her form flickered, as if she were slowly fading from existence. Her eyes were filled with sadness and longing, her face etched with the pain of being forgotten. Lilith's heart clenched. She reached out, her hand passing through Yao's spectral form.
I see you, Yao. We both do.
As Lilith reached out to touch Yao's hand, a chill ran through her body. The spirit's touch was like a cold breeze on a winter night, sending shivers down her spine.
Lilith, how do you want to help Yao? We need to hurry. There are still many spirits.
Lilu urged, encouraging her sister to focus on finding a solution. Lilith nodded absently, her mind already buzzing with possibilities.
What if we helped Yao make a connection? Something small, just enough to ease her transition.
Lilu raised an eyebrow, a hint of skepticism on her face.
And how exactly do you plan to do that?
She paused, thinking through the options.
It won't be easy.
She added, her tone shifting from doubt to determination.
But if it's what Yao needs, I'll make sure it happens.
Now fully committed, Lilu began formulating a plan, her thoughts focused on how to create a meaningful connection for Yao. Lilith might have sensed Yao's emotional pain, but it was Lilu who would work tirelessly to find a practical solution. Shaking off the melancholy, Lilith refocused on Yao.
Tell me, what was your favorite thing about life here?
Yao's ethereal form shimmered as she pondered the question, her voice a whisper on the wind.
The bakery, the scent of fresh bread at dawn. It reminded me of home.
Lilith smiled, understanding in her eyes.
Then that's what we'll do. We'll bring the smell of fresh bread to this street, and the children will carry it with them, keeping your memory alive.
Together, Lilith and Lilu channeled their energy, their powers intertwining to create a small but powerful spell. The bakery beside them began to emit the delicious aroma of home-baked bread. A group of children paused in their play, drawn to the bakery by the enticing scent. Curious, they approached the shop and peeked through the window. Inside, an old man with kind eyes was kneading dough at a work table. He looked up and smiled warmly at the children before returning to his work. Lilith and Lilu watched from a distance as the children's faces lit up with wonder and joy. Some pointed excitedly at the bread being pulled from the oven. Yao's ethereal form shimmered with contentment, her spirit lifted by the simple act. The two sisters exchanged smiles, their hearts full at the sight. They had found a way to ease Yao's transition and bring happiness to those still living.
Lilith turned to Yao.
How are you feeling now?
It's a little better, but I still feel empty.
Yao replied softly. As Lilith prepared to respond, her gaze drifted to a group of children shuffling down the street, their laughter muffled by the fog. A spark of inspiration struck her.
Those kids. We could influence them to do something in Yao's memory.
Lilu crossed her arms, her practical side resisting her sister's enthusiasm.
Fine, but make it quick. I'll handle the spiritual energy manipulation. You never were good at the finer points of influence.
Lilith beamed, turning back to Yao.
See? We're going to help you feel seen, even if just for a moment.
While Lilu focused on manipulating the spiritual energy around the children, Lilith found herself daydreaming. She watched the kids, imagining their laughter and the solid reality of their lives. A pang of longing hit her, and she wondered, as she often did, what it would be like to truly live among the living.
Lilu.
Lilith exclaimed, her eyes lighting up with inspiration.
Could you guide them to carve their pumpkin into a loaf of bread?
Lilu's brow furrowed, but she nodded. The children, oblivious to the supernatural influence, began giggling and chatting about their new jack-o'-lantern design. As the scene unfolded, Yao's form began to glow softly, her eyes widening with wonder.
They're remembering me in a way.
She whispered. Lilith smiled, though a nagging doubt tugged at her heart. Was this enough? Should she have done more? Her usually carefree nature allowed her to brush off such thoughts, but tonight, watching Yao's joy and Lilu's dedication, a twinge of guilt gnawed at her. Lilith asked Yao again.
How are you feeling now?
It's a little better, but I still feel empty.
Yao answered, looking at the twins with a flicker of hope. Yao hesitated before speaking again.
Can I follow you both for a while?
Her voice was soft, almost pleading. Lilu frowned.
This isn't a sightseeing tour. We have work to do.
Lilith tilted her head, curious.
Why do you want to come with us?
Yao's translucent form flickered slightly, her voice carrying a hint of sadness.
I came here to see the northern lights. It was something I always dreamed of, but I died before I could enjoy the beauty of this place.
She looked down, her eyes filled with regret.
Maybe if I could follow you around, I might feel like I've experienced something that could give me closure.
Lilith's expression softened, and she turned to Lilu.
Come on, Lilu. Let her come with us, please.
Lilu sighed, her brows furrowing. After a moment, she gave a short nod.
Fine, but stay out of the way. We don't have time for distractions.
Yao's face brightened, but before she could say thank you, Lilu raised her hand, her expression serious.
Before you follow us, there's something I need to do.
Lilu said, her fingers glowing faintly with the familiar energy of her magic.
Right now, only Lilith and I can understand the language of the other spirits. But you'll need a bit of help.
Yao blinked in confusion.
What do you mean?
Lilu sighed softly, her tone firm but not unkind.
You're from China, and your spirit still clings to that language. The other spirits here, they don't speak the same way. So, I'm going to cast a spell that'll let you communicate with them.
Without waiting for a response, Lilu traced symbols in the air, the glowing lines forming a delicate pattern around Yao. The symbols shimmered for a moment before dissolving into soft wisps of light, surrounding Yao like a veil.
There. Now you should be able to understand them, and they'll understand you.
Lilu said, her voice a mix of satisfaction and practicality.
This way, you won't be left out.
Yao smiled, grateful.
Thank you.
Don't thank me yet.
Lilu replied with a slight smirk.
There's still work to do.
Lilu led the two figures forward. Yao followed eagerly as they continued their walk through the town, guiding spirits that lingered in the shadows. They passed a small, dimly lit restaurant, its windows fogged from the warmth inside. Suddenly, the faint sound of sobbing caught their attention. Lilith stopped.
Do you hear that?
Yao turned toward the restaurant, her translucent hand hovering near the door.
It's coming from inside.
Without hesitation, they stepped through the wall into the dimly lit kitchen. At the far end of the room, near a stove cluttered with pots and pans, a woman's spirit sat on the floor, her face buried in her hands as she wept. Lilu stepped forward, her voice firm but gentle.
Why are you crying?
The spirit looked up, her tear-streaked face full of sorrow.
I was a cook here. I worked so hard, day and night. No one ever noticed me, and I never had time to talk to anyone. One day, I fell ill and died. And now, they've replaced me without a second thought. The new cook has taken my place, and no one even remembers I was here.
Her voice cracked as she continued.
I have been forgotten, and it hurts so much.
Yao's eyes widened, a flicker of recognition crossing her face.
You feel invisible, like no one sees you. I know how that feels.
She knelt beside the spirit, her voice soft with empathy.
I came here to see something beautiful, but I never got the chance. I died before anyone even knew I was here. Maybe that's why we're still here, because we feel like our lives didn't matter.
The spirit looked at Yao, her sobs quieting.
Yes, exactly. I just wanted someone to remember me.
Lilith exchanged a glance with Lilu, who nodded slightly.
We'll help you find peace.
Lilith said gently, kneeling beside the spirit.
You're not forgotten. We see you, and we'll help you move on.
Yao looked back at the twins, a sense of purpose settling over her.
Maybe I can help her too, just like you're helping me.
Lilu glanced at Yao, her expression unreadable but thoughtful.
Then let's get to work. There's still more to do tonight.
The town square buzzed with excitement as people gathered for the annual Halloween costume contest. The stage was lit by flickering lanterns, and rows of carved pumpkins lined the perimeter, casting eerie shadows across the cobblestones. Children and adults alike were dressed in elaborate costumes, some whimsical, others terrifying, parading across the stage while the crowd cheered. Lilu, Lilith, Yao, and the cook drifted through the crowd, unseen by the living. Though they moved among them, their spectral forms passed unnoticed, blending seamlessly into the chaotic energy of Halloween night. Lilu sighed, her gaze scanning the crowd.
This is a waste of time. We have work to do.
Lilith twirled beside her, eyes alight with excitement.
But look at all the costumes, and all the spirits gathering to watch.
Indeed, spirits from near and far had joined the human spectators, their transparent forms intermingling with the living, drawn to the energy of the night. Lilu frowned at her sister's excitement.
Lilith, we're not judges at a costume parade. There's real work to do.
She crossed her arms, glancing at the humans in their outlandish outfits.
I doubt any of these costumes will help spirits move on.
Lilith smiled, unbothered.
But look at how creative they are.
Lilu rolled her eyes.
Yes, very helpful. Maybe next year they'll dress as responsible spirit guides.
Yao's eyes brightened as she looked toward the stage.
A costume contest. I always wanted to see one in person. Maybe I could feel like I'm part of it somehow.
The cook, who had been quietly observing the crowd, smiled softly.
I used to watch things like this on TV. Maybe this is my chance to enjoy something, even if I'm not alive.
As the human contestants took the stage, dressed as witches, monsters, and fantastical creatures, the spirits gathered closer, their hollow eyes fixed on the performances. Yao and the cook stood among them, watching the spectacle unfold. The two exchanged amused glances as they observed the colorful display of Halloween costumes. The cook, her form flickering with a mischievous light, leaned closer to Yao, her voice carrying a soft laugh.
Look at that one,
she said, gesturing toward a human dressed in an elaborate dragon costume, complete with glowing scales and billowing wings.
Do they really think they can pass for a real dragon? The scales are all wrong, and I doubt dragons favor glitter.
Yao chuckled softly, her ethereal laughter blending with the rustling leaves.
And what about that one pretending to be a ghost?
She pointed out, eyes crinkling with amusement.
The shoe keeps slipping, revealing sneakers and jeans underneath. Quite the fashion statement.
Other spirits gathered around them, drawn by their light-hearted banter, sharing quiet laughs at the human attempts to mimic the supernatural. Yao and the cook watched as human contestants strutted across the stage in their exaggerated costumes. The cook, with her practical nature, chuckled softly at the sight of a man dressed as a giant banana doing an awkward dance, while Yao, with her gentle demeanor, marveled at the creativity and effort behind each ensemble.
They certainly are imaginative.
The cook remarked dryly, adjusting her apron as she leaned closer to Yao.
But I must say, they seem to have an odd fascination with dressing up as food items. Is that a common practice in the human world?
Yao's ethereal laughter tinkled like wind chimes in the night air.
It appears so. Look at that group over there.
She whispered, pointing to a cluster of humans dressed as various fruits and vegetables, complete with oversized hats and vibrant colors.
I believe they're trying to create a fruit salad ensemble.
A contestant dressed in a grand, flowing gown resembling a ghostly bride stepped onto the stage, her costume shimmering in the lantern light. One of the nearby spirits leaned toward Yao, a mischievous grin on his translucent face.
What do you think of that one?
He asked, nodding toward the contestant. Yao hesitated, but then smiled faintly.
It's beautiful, but a bit overdone, don't you think? Ghostly brides are kind of a Halloween cliché.
The cook chimed in thoughtfully.
The fabric could flow better. It's too stiff. It makes the whole thing look less ethereal.
The spirit chuckled, clearly impressed.
Not bad. Not bad at all.
As more contestants paraded across the stage, vampires, werewolves, and creatures of the night, the living crowd cheered while the spirits watched in silence, intrigued. Growing more confident, Yao and the cook began offering their thoughts to the other spirits around them.
That zombie outfit is pretty good,
Yao remarked.
but the makeup could use more detail. A bit more blood would make it more convincing.
And that mummy over there.
The cook added.
Those bandages are too clean. They need some grime to make it look realistic.
The nearby spirits began to murmur in agreement, nodding along with Yao and the cook's critiques. Even Lilu, who had been skeptical at first, glanced at Lilith with a raised eyebrow.
Looks like they've become quite the critics.
Lilith whispered with a smile. Lilu nodded in agreement. The contest continued, and with each new participant, Yao and the cook offered their insights. While the human crowd couldn't hear the commentary, the spirits around them listened intently, gathering in larger numbers to hear Yao and the cook's thoughts. The two spirits, who had once felt invisible, now found themselves at the center of a lively conversation among the dead. One of the spirits, a tall, shadowy figure with glowing eyes, turned to Yao and the cook.
You two have an eye for detail. It's not often we see spirits so engaged in the living world's festivities.
Yao blushed, her translucent form flickering slightly.
I've always loved creativity, and I never got the chance to see something like this when I was alive.
The cook nodded.
And I spent my days in the kitchen, never really having time for anything else. This feels different. It feels like I'm part of something again.
The shadowy spirit nodded in approval.
Well, you've certainly earned our respect tonight.
As the final contestant took the stage, the crowd erupted in applause. The contest had come to an end, and the judges began to deliberate. Yao and the cook stood quietly among the spirits, their hearts full. For the first time since their deaths, they felt like they belonged, not just to the world of the dead, but to something larger, shared by both the living and the spirits around them. Lilith, noticing the peace on Yao's and the cook's faces, turned to Lilu.
I think they've found what they were looking for.
Lilu nodded, her expression softening.
Yes, I think so too.
As the festivities carried on through the night, Yao and the cook stood tall, knowing that amidst the busy chaos of Halloween, they had finally found their place, surrounded by both the living and the dead. Lilu and Lilith took the opportunity to complete their duties, returning when the competition ended. As the festivities wound down, Yao stood beside the cook and a few other spirits who had become their companions throughout the night. They exchanged quiet smiles, no longer burdened by the weight of loneliness. Lilu and Lilith returned, their tasks completed. Lilu gave a small sigh.
It's done. Yao, you're ready to move on now.
Yao nodded, glancing at the cook and the other spirits. Her form flickered slightly, but remained solid.
Thank you both. I never realized that being part of something, even for just a moment, could make me feel seen and understood again.
The cook nodded, her translucent form glowing faintly.
It's strange, isn't it? Even in death, we can still find new connections. I never realized how much being surrounded by others, by friends, could make all the difference.
One of their new spirit friends, a tall figure with a gentle smile, spoke up.
We'll cross together as friends. No one has to be alone anymore.
Yao smiled, her eyes shining with gratitude.
Yes, together.
As the group of spirits gathered, preparing to pass into the next world, they stood united, no longer fading away in solitude, but moving forward as a group. Lilu and Lilith watched as their new friends crossed over, their forms gradually becoming brighter until they vanished into the distance, hand in hand. As Yao's group disappeared, Lilu's shoulders sagged slightly.
Another spirit guided. but there's still so much to do tonight.
Lilith, noticing the tension in her sister, reached out to touch her arm.
You know, Lou, you don't always have to be the serious one. It's okay to lighten up sometimes. We're doing good work, and it doesn't all have to be heavy.
Lilu's dark eyes met Lilith's, a swirl of frustration and affection simmering beneath the surface.
Someone has to be. If we both approached our duties like you, Lil, nothing would get done. You're always so carefree.
Lilith smiled softly, though a hint of conflict lingered in her expression.
I know, but sometimes I wonder, maybe I should take things more seriously, like you. Maybe I don't do enough.
Lilu's frown softened as she studied her sister.
It's not about doing enough. It's about balance. If you became more like me, we'd lose what makes us a good team. You bring something to this work that I can't.
Lilith tilted her head, thoughtful.
And you bring something that I can't.
The sisters stood quietly for a moment, the weight of the night and their shared responsibilities settling between them. Their work wasn't done yet. There were still more spirits to guide, more connections to make. But in that brief pause, they both understood the value of each other's role. The moral of the story? Loneliness can stem from feeling misunderstood, but true connection is found through empathy and kindness, regardless of the differences that divide us. Loneliness fades when someone reaches out in kindness, as everyone deserves to feel seen and valued.